Shalom, welcome back. This is part 4 of What's Up with Galatians. And so we just got finished going through the book of Romans and 1 Corinthians and seeing if we could kind of read between the lines about what's going on there. What were the issues that Paul was responding to? And the reason we're doing this is because we're building up to Paul's trip into Jerusalem, the one where he goes into the temple and ends up being in protective custody of the Romans and the Herodians. And so we're looking at this and trying to figure out what were the issues, what was kind of going on, what was going on between Paul and the rest of the believers. And we're kind of like filling in the gap in between the event in Antioch that was written about in the book of Galatians and this final trip to Jerusalem where Paul has the incident in the temple. So in part 1, we saw that Paul wrote Galatians as a response to an incident which had a disagreement with Kepha. And whatever it was, we don't really know the details of the event. We know it caused some sort of division between Paul and the rest of these early believers. The evidence seems to indicate that the issue was exposed by John Mark, who was likely a member of Yeshua's family, and that Paul was on one side of the issue and virtually everyone else was on the opposite side. And then in parts 2 and 3, we went through the Epistle of James, compared it to Galatians. Notice that it was probably a response to Galatians. Regardless, we could see that James had obvious differences of theology with Paul. In fact, he even quotes the same scriptures as Paul, but in the opposite interpretation. And that the people Paul was highly critical of in Galatians, and now, of course, also Romans and Corinthians, seem to be members of Yeshua's family and his inner circle, the apostles themselves. And the rift is still evident in Romans and 1 Corinthians between Paul and James, or Paul and Kepha. Now, at this point, I guess I could mention it, there may be a possibility that at this point, Paul doesn't know for sure which side James is going to come down on. And that may be why he was kind of calling out Kepha in 1 Corinthians a little bit. So, again, here's kind of what we're talking about. The arrows pointing to Corinth. This is where the action is kind of centered around right now. And all the way over on the right side of the screen of the map, you can see Antioch up there. So Paul right now, he's Antioch is where this disagreement occurred. Of course, you know where Jerusalem is. You can see it down there too. So Paul now, he's put quite a bit of distance between himself and the apostles. And then Apollos shows up at Corinth, and things are getting difficult for Paul again. He's defending himself with the Corinthians. Obviously, there's some kind of accusations going on. Paul is saying that they're putting him on trial, and they are certainly questioning his beliefs, and Paul is urging them not to let the people that he calls weaker in faith, who appears to be the Jerusalem assembly themselves, not to let them know that he's said it's okay to eat meat sacrificed to idols. So it seems like Paul is trying to do some damage control here. So now we get into 2 Corinthians. He says, "For we do not wish you to be ignorant, brothers, of our pressure which came to us in Asia." So something's going on in Asia. Now he's got people that are coming after him there. Remember in the book of Acts, it says that Paul's gospel was going all through Asia. But now he's having problems in Asia. He says that we were weighed down exceedingly beyond ability, so that we despaired even of life. Indeed, we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in Elohim who raises the dead. So, it appears that Paul was put on trial, and he thought he was about to get the death penalty, which to me, when I think of death penalty in that context, you think of Paul thought he was about to get stoned to death, which is generally what happens when you're teaching something blasphemous. Take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 13 and what you're supposed to do when somebody is teaching against the Torah, turning people away from the Torah. Paul thought he was about to get the death penalty in Asia. Now, notice this kind of lines up with what Yeshua says in Revelation. He says, to the messenger of the assembly of Ephesus, write. Now, this is where, again, Ephesus is the town that Paul bypassed because he said he was in too big of a hurry to get to Jerusalem, but yet he stopped just past Ephesus, and then he asked for the elders of Ephesus to come see him in this other town. So something was going on in Ephesus that Paul didn't want to stop there. To the messenger of the assembly of Ephesus write, I know your works and your labor and your endurance, that you are not able to bear evil ones, and have tried those who say they are apostles and are not, and have found them false. Now, what was Paul saying to the Corinthians, the first Corinthians, in the last video? He was defending himself against people who were saying that he was not an apostle. And here you see Yeshua praising the assembly of Ephesus because they exposed people who said they were emissaries but were not. Moving on, verse 12, it says, and to the messenger of the assembly in Pergamos write, I hold a few matters against you because you have here those who adhere to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, and to eat food sacrificed to idols and commit whoring. So who was teaching the people to eat food offered to idols? Well, Paul was doing it. He just went and tried to cover it up and do a little bit of damage control in 1 Corinthians. But we know where this is coming from. Both of these descriptions fit Paul. Back to 2 Corinthians. He says, are we to begin to recommend ourselves again, or do we need, as some, letters of recommendation to you or from you? You are our letter, having been written on our hearts, known and read by all men, making it obvious that you are a letter of Messiah, served by us, written not in ink, but by the Spirit of the living Elohim, not on tablets of stone, but on fleshly tablets of the heart. Okay, so now people are asking for letters of recommendation from Paul. And Paul, he's kind of sidestepping the issue and saying, you are our letters. He's turning this into something kind of like ethereal type of thing, where, the letter kills. So you're written on the tablets of our heart. And he's spewing this rhetoric at him because he's trying to obfuscate the issue. Somebody's asking him. Somebody in Corinth is asking Paul for letters of recommendation. So who are they asking for letters of recommendation from? Now we turn to the recognitions of Clement, also known as the Nazarene Acts. And we have Kepha saying, so observe the greatest caution that you believe no teacher unless he brings from Jerusalem the testimonial of James, Yaakov, Yeshua's brother, or of whosoever may come after him. So they have to bring letters of recommendation from the head of the Jerusalem assembly. At this point it's James, but Kepha says, or whoever comes after him, whoever is James's next in succession. For no one, unless he has gone up thither, and there has been approved as a fit and faithful teacher for preaching the word of Mashiach, unless I say he brings a testimonial thence, is by any means to be received, but let neither Navi nor Sholiach be looked for by you at this time, besides us. For there is one Navi, one prophet Emet, one prophet of truth, whose words we 12 Shlichim preach, for he is the accepted year of Yeshua, having us Shlichim as his 12 months. So, now we know who Paul is needing a recommendation from. And now we know why in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul asked, Romans 15, where Paul asked the Romans to pray for him because he's getting ready to go to Jerusalem. Now we know why. Now we know why Paul's going back to Jerusalem, because he's got to get these letters of recommendation if he's going to be able to continue his ministry. For we do not again commend ourselves to you, but give you an occasion to boast on our behalf, in order that you have been an answer for those who take pride in appearances and not in heart. Those who need the letter. So from now onwards, we know no one according to the flesh. And if we have known Messiah according to the flesh, yet now we no longer know thus. Therefore, if anyone is in Messiah, he is a renewed creature. The old matters have passed away. See, all matters have become renewed. So let's focus in on verse 16. If we have known Messiah according to the flesh, who knew Messiah according to the flesh? See, Paul knows the spiritual Messiah. He had a spiritual vision on the road to Damascus. Who knew Messiah according to the flesh? Well, Kepha and James and John and the apostles. The apostles knew Yeshua according to the flesh. They don't know the Yeshua according to the Spirit like Paul does. See what he says here? He says, yet now we no longer know thus. So in other words, if you only knew him according to the flesh, you don't really know him anymore, because now he's different. So again, we see Paul defending himself against Yeshua's original followers. Rather, we commend ourselves as servants of Elohim in every way, in much endurance, and pressures, and hardships, and distresses, and stripes, and imprisonments. And he goes on and boasts, and boasts, and boasts, and boasts, through esteem and disrespect, through evil report and good report, regarded as deceivers, underlined, and yet true. Regarded as deceivers. Who's Paul defending himself against? And is always rejoicing as poor, yet enriching many, as having none, and yet possessing all. And I shall myself appeal to you through the meekness and gentleness of Messiah, I who am indeed lowly when face to face with you, but bold towards you when absent. So after he just got finished boasting about how great of an apostle he was, he says, but I pray that now he's talking about how lowly and meek he is. He says, but I pray that when I am present, I might not be bold with that bravery by which I think to be bold against some who reckon us as if we walked according to the flesh. Let's read this again, see what he's saying. But I pray that when I'm present, I might not be bold with that bravery by which I think to be bold against some who reckon us as if we walked according to the flesh. It almost sounds like a veiled threat. You ever said something like that to somebody? Like you're on the phone with someone, or you hear about something someone did and you get really angry and you're like, boy, I better hope I don't catch them out. They better hope that I don't find them while I'm still this mad. I almost think this is a veiled threat. For we do not presume to count ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves. Now we're back to the subject of asking for letters of recommendation. Now he's saying that all these, they measure themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, but are not wise. So these guys, these people that are asking for letters of recommendation, they're just out to puff themselves up with their own letters. They're just, want to compare themselves and make themselves seem important by asking all this stuff. But we shall not boast beyond measure, but within the measure of the limits of Elohim assigned to us, to reach even you. But he who boasts, let him boast in Yahuwah. For not he who commends himself is approved, but he whom the master commends. So now he's turning it back around. He's saying these people are asking for these letters of recommendation because they're boasting on themselves. They're getting all wrapped up in their own authority, and they're working against Paul. Paul is approved of Messiah. He doesn't need letters of recommendation. That's the message he's putting forth. But I am afraid lest, as the serpent deceived Eve or Hava by his trickery, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Messiah. For indeed, if he who is coming proclaims another Yeshua, whom we have not proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different gospel or good news which you have not accepted, you put up with it well enough. For I reckon that I am not inferior to the most eminent apostles. Oh, so again, he comes back to this boasting. Most eminent apostles. Now, if you go and look that up, in a concordance, what does Paul say in there in 2 Corinthians 11:5? The word for eminent, the most eminent emissaries, what he's saying is that I reckon I'm not inferior to the most super apostles. Uber apostolos, I believe is what it says in the Greek. So he's sarcastically calling this group super apostles. But notice what he's doing. He's confessing who the enemy is. He's confessing who his enemy is. It's the apostles, the super apostles, because they knew Yeshua according to the flesh, not his risen spiritual Yeshua. They just know the Yeshua of the flesh, and they think they're super apostles. And I shall go on doing as I do, in order to cut off the occasion of those desiring an occasion, so that in that which they boast they may be found also as we are. For such are false emissaries, false apostles. So now Yeshua's chosen apostles are the false apostles, deceptive workers, masquerading as emissaries of Messiah, masquerading as apostles of Messiah. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as a messenger of light. It is not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of unrighteousness. If his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Again I say, let no one think me to be a fool. And if otherwise, at least receive me as a fool, for me to also boast a little. What I speak not according to the master, but as in foolishness. In this boldness of boasting, since many boast according to the flesh, I too shall boast. For you, being wise, put up with fools gladly. For you put up with anyone who enslaves you. If anyone devours you, if anyone takes from you, if anyone exalts himself, if one hits you in the face. See, now Paul's worked up. Boast, 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 boast. I'm a fool if I boast. I too shall boast. Let me boast. I'm going to boast, boast, boast. What does James say? James say, but now you boast in your proud speeches. All such boasting is wicked. Is there any question about who James is talking about in his epistle? And to keep me from exalting myself because of the exceeding greatness of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to hit me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I pleaded with the master 3 times to take it away from me, and he said to me, my favor is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. I have become a fool. You have compelled me, for I shall have been commended by you, for In no respect was I behind these super apostles, though I am a nobody. Indeed, the signs of an apostle were wrought among you with all endurance, signs and wonders and powers. So I may have been wrong. I think this may have been where the Uber Apostolos was. But I will have to go back and look up that other reference. He may have said it twice. But again, who is this thorn in the flesh? Who is the thorn in the flesh? Is it a person? Is he sick? I mean, there's different questions about it. Some people say it was because he was blind, but his blindness was cured. But he talks about the thorn in the flesh. And 2 verses later, he's back to complaining about the apostles. For I should have commended by you? For I should have been commended by you? Who's he talking about? He's responding to the person whom he's supposed to be commended by. Who does he need the letters of recommendation from? I think that's the thorn in his flesh. Examine yourselves whether you are in the belief. Prove yourselves. Or do you not know yourselves that Yeshua Messiah is in you? Unless you are disproved, and I trust that you shall know that we are not disproved. And we pray to Elohim that you do no evil at all, not that we should appear approved, but that you should do what is right, even though we should appear unapproved. So again, it's the same thing coming up. If you really strip away all the extra stuff, I'm leaving out a lot of verses because Paul just, he uses this rhetoric to the point that your head is spinning, and then he throws in stuff like this, and you don't quite catch what he's saying. His status as an emissary or an apostle is being questioned, and he's being asked to prove it. And the thorn in his flesh is demanding. He's having to go to this person who's the thorn in his flesh to get this letter of recommendation, because without it, he can't continue his missionary journey. So now he's going to have to go, and what's he got to do? The people accusing him are all the way over in Corinth and up in Asia. So Paul probably thinks that all he's got to do now, this is before the internet. This is before, this is before, telegrams. It would take, weeks to get from Corinth over to Jerusalem. So Paul probably thinks if he can just get to Jerusalem in time, meet with James, get this letter of recommendation, say what he's got to say in order to, to one who are weak, I became as weak. To the Jews, I became as a Jew. So that's what Paul's got to do. He's got to get there before proof gets back, before the actual other people's letters get back. He's got to get to Jerusalem and get these letters of recommendation. While he, I really think he thought he could go into Jerusalem and play the part of a true believer long enough to get the letter. I think that's what his plan was. Philippians. I'm just going to touch on a couple of verses in some of Paul's other letters. Philippians. Look out for dogs. Look out for the evil workers. Look out for the mutilation. What is the mutilation? Well, he's talking about circumcision. Very next sentence. For we are the circumcision. We are the circumcision. Look out for the mutilation. The circumcision of the flesh, that's the mutilation. It's a mutilation, but we're the true circumcision, who are serving Elohim in the Spirit and boasting in Messiah Yeshua, and do not trust in the flesh. So see, if you're circumcised in the flesh, that's your mutilation, but we're the true circumcision of the Spirit. Become joint imitators of me, brothers, and observe those who so walk, as you have us for a pattern. For many, of whom I have often told you, and now say to you, even weeping, walk as enemies of the stake of the Messiah. Their end is destruction, their mighty one is their stomach, and their esteem is their shame. They mind the earthly. So, he's alluding to who it is, the people whose mighty one is their stomach. very similar to what he said in 2 Corinthians about them. Or maybe it's 1 Corinthians, they served their stomach. It's the same group, and he's still talking about the apostles. Okay, so thus far I've pretty much stuck with the, if you've studied Paul at all, you know that there are certain letters that the scholars, the scholarly people say are the genuine Pauline epistles, and then there are some that are generally thought to have been written by someone else. And so, oddly enough, the genuine epistles, the ones that are generally regarded as being genuine, they're the only ones that really talk negatively about the apostles. Like, you don't see it in the ones that are disputed. The only exception, and I'm just throwing this out there just so, to be honest about it, this is the only possible exception to that. And I don't think that this verse is speaking specifically about the apostles like the others are. I think that whoever wrote Colossians, if they were trying to imitate Paul, they also threw this in there because they always saw Paul as arguing against the Jews. They didn't realize that he was arguing against the Nazarenes themselves. And of course, this is one I'm sure you've heard plenty if you are keeping kosher or in the Hebraic roots movement at all. Let no one therefore judge you in eating or drinking, and in respect to a festival or new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the body of Messiah. Let no one deprive you of the prize, one who takes delight in false humility and worship of messengers, taking a stand on what he has not seen, puffed up by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the growth of Elohim. If then you died with Messiah from the elementary matters of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which are all to perish with use according to the commands and teachings of men. Okay, so this is the only passages in any of the disputed epistles of Paul that speak negatively about, that could possibly be something being said negatively about the Jerusalem assembly. I underline the part about the worship of messengers because that's an accusation you see a lot with the group that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, whom I also believe to be the Jerusalem assembly, at least for part of them, for part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because people say that the Qumran group were worshiping angels. However, if you actually go and read the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'll see that that's not the case. The Qumran people, the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they believed that the earthly tabernacle was a shadow of the heavenly tabernacle, and that by keeping the proper calendar, the proper times of worship, that the Zadokite priests who were in exile in Qumran could join in with the priests, the angelic priests in the heavenly tabernacle, and worship with the heavenly tabernacle. They were not worshiping the angels. They were attempting to worship with the angels. So when you see the throne room and the angels are standing around the throne singing, holy, holy, holy is Yahuwah Zavaot of hosts, that's what the priests at Qumran were trying to join in with. It was not the worship of angels. So that's the one thing that I wanted to kind of highlight. But other than that, all of the disparaging comments about the apostles, they're all located within the epistles that are regarded as the genuine epistles written by Paul. So that's it. That's the end of this video. And when we come back next time, we will pick up and actually get into this confrontation that Paul has in Jerusalem. So thank you for listening, and shalom.